Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the November Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council meeting. I'm Kristen Evans, and I'll be your items on our. The first is to review the slate of the board nominees for the calendar year start, the year long term from December 2021 to November 2022. That piece of business shouldn't take too long, and then we'll jump right into our conversation and an update with Supervisor Preston. So Tess, I have the nominees in front of me. Just make sure that I'm following all protocols. Do I need to request nominees from the floor? Thank you for that. Nope. Tess, if you're speaking, I can't hear you.
Oh, Kristen, yes, you do want to ask if there are any nominations from the floor.
Okay. So thank you. First time I'm facilitating this part of the agenda. So
and then go through the names and if anyone wants to waive or say something.
Great. Sounds good. I'll go down the list.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So are there any nominations from the floor for the HANC board? The people that can make nominations at this point in time must have paid dues in the last year's period. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go through the list of the slate recommended by the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council current board. Great. And I'll ask each of the people that I introduce to say a few remarks or just wave. So for president, we are suggesting and recommending our current president, Lisa Aubrey, for another term. Lisa?
We can't see anybody except the slate right now.
Oh, that's
right.
I got it.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that's a good point. Maybe I'll go through the full list and then I'll let people kind of chime in individually after that. Sorry, first time on Zoom. This would be so much easier in person. Okay, let's throw it up there again, Bruce. Sorry.
I got the Lisa spotlighted.
Thank you so much. And there she is, Lisa Aubrey. Great. Okay. I have the list on my phone too, so I can just read it here. For Vice President David Wu, is David on the phone? For Recording Secretary, Jim Rhodes.
I'm here.
Thank you, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
For Corresponding Secretary, Bruce Wolf.
Here.
Our trusted host. Treasurer, myself, Kristen Evans. Nominating Chair, James Sword. Membership Chair, Richard Ivanhoe.
Here.
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Housing and Land Use Chair, Calvin Welch. Recording Chair, Karen Fishkin. Karen on by phone. Yeah, she's usually joins by phone. We can't hear you, Karen, if you're on there and muted. Members at large, Tab Buckner, Jamie Michaels, Sharon Noel, Christian Base, and Tess Wellborn. Great. Super. So may I take a motion from the floor?
I move that the current slate of officers and board members be accepted.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Great. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All voters must be members in good standing.
Thank you.
But-
Thank you for the reminder, Tess.
Thank you.
In any opposed?
Hmm.
And any abstentions? Okay, congratulations, everybody. We have a new 2021-2022 board for the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council. My hope is that this board will carry us into the physical realm of in-person meetings in the new year. Thank you. All right. So tonight, we are going to have a conversation. We've dedicated the full meeting to a conversation with our Supervisor Dean Preston. The couple of issues that we had surfaced.
Hold up, I'll be right back. I gotta go get some Wendy's.
The couple of issues that we'd had surfaced in the newsletter for discussion would be an update on the interim use of 730 Stanyon. Also, the safety and recent shooting incidents which had taken place in October, and unfortunately we had another one on this past Thursday. As well.
Guys, I
as-
think we're getting Zoom bombed. I think Jim Rhodes. He looks kind of like a Zoom bomber. Yeah, Carla Zeus.
I'm just gonna remove you from the meeting and prevent you from coming
I
back in.
think we got some Zoom bombers. I think you should remove Jim Rhodes.
Yeah, I think I'll remove you.
Oh yeah, do it.
Thanks, Bruce. I know we had Zoom bombers at the meeting last night as well. It's a thing. As well as the third topic that we had talked about was the return of the bus lines. But we are going to have sufficient time to cover other topics of interest and hear from Supervisor Preston about issues that are pressing on his mind. I know he's been working hard on the eviction-free District 5, and I would love to hear an update on that as well. So let me just see here. I think we're missing our main speaker though. Is that right?
Chris, the guy Chris, he's Zoom bombing.
Uh,
Yeah, he's just playing Fortnite.
That boy playing Fortnite though. That's crazy.
I believe that Dean is coming on at approximately 7:30, and that there may be a few other things that we can talk about in the meantime.
Okay, and I do also see that Captain Pedrini has joined. Is that right?
Hi, Kristen. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Thank you,
I
Captain
hope- I hope-
Pedrini.
I hope you don't mind.
No, I'm glad you're here. In fact, don't want
Hey
to
yo,
put
bro,
you
I
on
thought
this.
you removed me. I'm still in.
This is not exactly Captain Pedrini. That's what I was wondering. But I didn't think we invited Captain Chris Pedrini to this meeting. But
No, it is me.
Wait, Norman, where are you?
so Bruce, yeah, if you could go ahead and remove
No,
that one
he
as
is
well.
here.
I am doing it.
Okay, thanks.
Baba Boo.
So just give us a minute while we remove any of the Zoom bombers.
Hello?
Yes, hi. Is that Louise?
Yes, I'm on the telephone. I have no idea what Zoom bombers are, but I clearly can hear people that are talking at the same time that the speakers are trying to talk, and that is very distressing when one's trying to listen to a meeting. It's also extremely juvenile. So whomever you are, stop it and act like an adult.
I am an adult.
Thank you,
Act like
Louise.
one. I'm going silent
I agree
again.
with Louise. It's kind of ridiculous. We're trying to have a meeting here.
Bruce, if you co-host me, I can help you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a little hard. Sure.
Yeah, it just looks like we have quite a few tonight. So,
There you go. Yeah,
I hope you've muted me again,
I can do that.
because I'm done.
hi, Louise.
All right. I think we got rid of most of the Zoom bombers, guys.
I'm just gonna temporarily make it so folks can't unmute themselves.
Thank you, David.
Okay, continue.
All right, wonderful. So I'm guessing we don't actually have the real Captain Pedrini on the phone tonight.
Maybe have folks, if you want to use the raise hand function, you could raise your hand and then we can unmute you.
That sounds good.
So it looks like
Hi, Kristen, I'm on. It's Chris Pedrini, I'm on. I wasn't your Zoom bomber, I promise.
Okay.
He started talking right when I started talking, so
I thought I recognized your voice, but I just wanted to make sure.
I'm
Okay,
here.
so don't want to put you on the spot unless you're okay to just give a general update. Sounds like we're waiting for Supervisor Preston to join, and he is expected to join in 15 minutes.
Okay, you want an update on the crime and the cases?
That would be great. As I'm guessing most of the people were not on last night's community meeting. I did take a look at who were the participants in last night's roll call, and I didn't see that much overlap between tonight's meeting participants and last night's meeting.
Okay, so hi, everybody. It's Chris Pedrini. I'm the captain of Park Station. So I'll just go through the most recent incidents we had. We had the incident at Hayton Central. So just briefly, you have to remember one thing is that once the case goes to investigations, it leaves my hands. So I don't have all the details on what's going on. So I have to go through the Investigations Bureau to get an update on what can be released and what can't. So the real issue is we never want to jeopardize a case. There's a couple parts of it. We never want to jeopardize the investigation. We never want to jeopardize future court proceedings, and we never want to jeopardize somebody's safety. So if we say something that shouldn't be out there and it leads to somebody hearing about something, it could jeopardize somebody's safety. So we don't want to do that. So what I've been authorized to release in regards to the Hayton Central is what they believe so far is that there were two different groups of folks that were driving through the district that were intent on doing auto burglaries. There were some gang ties in each of these different groups. They have vendettas against each other, these two groups, and they came across each other at Hayton Central and decided they were going to go after each other right then and there. So that is what transpired there. One person was shot and critically injured. They're still in critical condition, but expected to survive. So that's the one at Hayton Central. The one at Haight and Masonic, I talked to the investigator. That is a homicide investigation. He wouldn't allow me to go into great detail with that. I think what everybody knows at this point is that it was folks in a car that confronted a person on the street. There was gunfire that erupted between the two groups. or not groups, that's just between the groups of the people in the car, the group of the people in the car and the person on the street. One of the persons from the car was shot and did die from his injuries on the scene. The person on the street was shot and was taken to SF General, is in critical condition still. That is really all I can get into details of that. Of course, both of these cases are very important, very serious and active and ongoing investigations. These investigations are very complex. I've worked up in major crimes and homicide for the better part of 5 years. So I just want to say that, you know, they get a ton of attention. The investigators are working around the clock on these, and it just takes some time. They have to go through all the evidence, all the standard stuff that you would all think about, all the kinds of electronic records, all kinds of DNA, standard stuff, fingerprints, all those sorts of things. So they're working on that. And then the last one I'll talk about briefly is the shooting that happened at Ashbury, north of the Panhandle. So that was a completely unrelated one as well. That was 4 people that decided to do a burglary of a commercial establishment at about 11 or so p.m. They broke the window. It alerted a bystander in the area. He tried to shoo them off and confront them, and then they shot at him. Luckily, he was not hit in the gunfire, and then they got in the car and fled the scene. That case is also being investigated by our Major Crimes Division. And we have some information on vehicle, but we're still working on that one as well. So those are the 3. Obviously, everybody is very concerned about this, increase in violent crimes in the hate. So what we did in Park Station is we summoned all the help we could muster over the weekend. I myself came out on Saturday, walked the beat, drove around. We had our traffic cars out. So we've increased the presence. We held over, just briefly, we have 3 different shifts roughly at Park Station. A day shift that get off at 4 p.m., a swing shift which starts at 3 p.m., and a graveyard shift that works 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. Each one of those shifts had to work 4 extra hours. So the day shift, instead of getting off at 4 p.m., they got off at 8 p.m. Swing shift, instead of starting at 3 p.m., they started at 11 a.m. And then the graveyard shift, instead of getting off at 7 a.m., got off at 11 a.m. And so we had an increased presence in the immediacy after these events. And then luckily, we were actually able to turn to the rest of the police department to get some outside help, because our big fear would be to continuously burn out the members of Park Station by making them work 14-hour days. And then they're not as efficient or as effective in their normal duties. So we were able to get help from the rest of the police department. We have that scheduled to go through next week. We also brought out our gigantic command van out there. You might see it at Haight and Ashbury. I had worked out of there the last 2 days. I made it my office, which we made it essentially Park Police Station for the last couple of days. It'll be there probably till Monday or Tuesday, but that's needed elsewhere. So we plan on continuing the extra deployments on Haight as long as we can, but the big motorhome has to go at some point. So that's basically an update. I'm happy to answer any questions you want, Kristen.
And I think you mentioned that at yesterday's meeting that the visible presence had deterred.
Yeah, so to my knowledge, since we started that deployment Friday and Saturday, we haven't seen the auto burglary crews go through. No, like I said, no auto burglaries to my knowledge, and no robberies to my knowledge have happened in the Haight Street corridor. Now, we recognize the fact that this big presence is going to deter, and also some of the criminal element that are out may go to other neighborhoods. So we have seen an uptick in the surrounding neighborhoods. So we have to adjust as we go. maybe widen our focus a little bit. But we need to have that presence out there to make sure that the folks that are coming through this community stop.
Mhm. I see we have a question from a phone number, 415-794.
Yeah, that's Karen.
Thanks, Karen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me. Okay. I have two. Regarding the incident over on Hayes and Ashbury, which store was targeted and do you know why? And then the other question is, since folks are now using cars a lot and pulling up and they have guns and it's pretty dangerous, are there driving habits that we should be on the lookout for that would tell us that these folks are close to kind of an explosion?
Well, those are really good questions. So the incident that happened on Ashbury and Hayes, my understanding was a liquor store that was targeted. I don't know why it was targeted. They broke the window, but never did make access because they were confronted. Of course, they did shoot at the person that confronted them, which we never recommend. When we talk about confronting crime in progress, it's always best to be a good witness and call us. We don't want to see anybody else get hurt in these crimes.
Sure.
I give the person a lot of credit for doing that, but I just don't want to see anybody hurt. So that's what we know about that case so far. And then in terms of the folks driving habits, we do recognize and do see. I mean, I myself personally have seen them. I go out frequently. They do drive. They drive terrible. They drive crazy. And the issue really is this: is that it's the same vehicles that go around the city to all the touristy areas and are looking for auto burglary opportunities. We hear them on the radio in the Fisherman's Wharf area, and then the Palace of Fine Arts and Legion of Honor, and then they come through Haight, they hit the park, they hit Twin Peaks, and then they go out to other touristy areas. So we're hearing them on the radio all day. And so I talked about this last night, and here's the real issue is our policy, basically our pursuit policy, says that we can only get involved in a vehicle pursuit, a high-speed vehicle pursuit, in cases that involve a violent felony. So if they've just committed auto burglary, we can't engage in a vehicle pursuit. Now that said, about 2 weeks ago, I was out, I saw one of the vehicles that had been doing them all over the city. And I personally engaged in a vehicle pursuit. And the reason I did that is because in one of those auto burglaries, somebody confronted them and they pulled a handgun. So that kicks it over into the violent felony area. Now you have to remember that they drive, this was 5:00 p.m. during a weekday, and they drive crazy. And the biggest concern would be that we engage in a vehicle pursuit, they drive like that because we're chasing them now, and then they crash into somebody, kill somebody, an innocent pedestrian or bystander during this chase. So I honestly, I couldn't even keep up with them. They were driving so terrible. So I hope that answers your question. I don't know if it does.
Kristen, we have two questions in the chat.
Great. Thank you for calling my attention to that. Can you read them? I seem to have my chat reset.
So Kat and Richard ask, are any of these incidents related?
So far, to my knowledge, none of them are related. We don't have any information that I know of that relates them.
And Jan asks, did the people in the cars all get away? And do we know whether they are from out of the area?
So there, to my knowledge, none are from the actual park district. So you're talking about the case at Haight and Central.
They didn't specify.
Yeah, we don't have any information that any are from the actual neighborhood where this occurred.
Okay,
There is no, to my knowledge, there's no turf dispute, war going on. There's none of that stuff. It's just people coming through the neighborhood. And they're looking for crimes of opportunity, quite honestly. So that's why the severe increased presence that we've had recently to try to get them to stop coming to this neighborhood.
okay. I have just on the kind of best practices for safety. If somebody sees an incident like this happening and they call either 911 or the whatever other phone, is using the words quote unquote, something happening in progress, helpful?
Yes. So if you see a crime in progress like this, it's going to be a 911 call, and we're going to get dispatched to it right away.
But using the words in progress, is that helpful?
Yes. Yes, it is helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And I think one of the things that you said, but I just gonna bears repeating, is it's best to not involve yourself. The people engaged in property crimes are armed, and it's not safe to intervene.
Yeah. So I talked about this last night. What we've always taught, even our police officers, is to, if you see a crime and you're off duty, be a good witness. Take note of everything that's going on, pay attention. If you see a license plate, try to remember it, write it down, but don't get involved, because it just tends to add somebody else as a potential victim.
Thank you, Captain Pedrini. And I do see that Supervisor Preston has now joined us. Supervisor Preston, I kicked off the meeting explaining that you were going to cover a range of topics, but since Captain Pedrini was here, we did start off with the safety of the community and the incidents which have recently taken place that have obviously rocked our neighborhood. If you'd like to make any comments on that.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, and I'll touch on some other issues that definitely some updates I want to give, but I know you wanted to take the first part of the meeting to talk about public safety. I know some of you were on our meeting last night. We had over 180 people who were on that meeting to talk in depth with Captain Pedrini presented, folks from Mayor's Office of Violence Prevention, James Caldwell, as well as folks, Howard and Arturo from the Street Violence Intervention Program, SVIP. And I think had a good meeting. I think it's obviously really shocking to have this kind of gun violence anywhere, but to have two incidents in such close, within less than 2 weeks, within a block of each other, is in a neighborhood that really, other than the off-duty FBI agent, just has not seen gun violence in recent history. So it's definitely really alarming. I do appreciate Captain Pedrini's been really on top of this, and we've all been in pretty close communication in terms of trying to get information and look at what kind of prevention efforts we can undertake. So I sorry to join late. I know he's covered a lot of this. I'm happy to answer, when it comes to after I talk about issues, if folks have questions for me as well, that's fine. But I do just want to urge folks to use the victim assistance resources, and just want folks to know that, that's not just for the direct victim and their families. It's also for a lot of folks in the community who've been traumatized by this, who are neighbors, who are merchants, who saw someone, lying on the street after being shot and so forth. Like, there's a lot of people are traumatized by these crimes, and a lot of the victim services are available either through community groups or through the city to assist folks who are needing some assistance in the aftermath of these crimes. So I will leave it at that. I'm happy to answer questions. And again, thank you. I know a lot of you were on our call yesterday, as well as that we had a call. Thank you, Kristen, for setting up the call with the merchants on Monday. And Captain Pedrini joined me at HAMA to talk through some of the issues that were specific for merchants.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any questions or hands raised. So I'm gonna just pause for a minute, see if there's any specific questions about the safety of the community and the incidents which took place. Want to give space for that because it's so critical that we have a discussion about that. But also want to go ahead and move the meeting along too if there is an interest in hearing on other topics. Okay, great. I'm seeing some things coming up. I do, if you could unmute Dan Miller from Urban School, please.
Yeah, let me find it.
Dan Miller is the name.
There you go.
Hi, thank you. And my camera's turned off as well, but I did have one question for Captain Pedrini or Dean Preston. Knowing that, you know, that the level of police on the street is not something you'll be able to sustain longer term, but also knowing that sort of more systemic solutions take a long time. Is there anything in between those two extremes, sort of approaching the root cause of these issues on one end and then police presence on the other end? Are there any other measures to make the street and neighborhood safer that neighbors or community members could participate in? So again, knowing that, as you've mentioned, this level of you know, that you're spread thin and you'll be needing to move to some of your officers to other places, and also knowing that people have mixed feelings about a strong police presence as well. So that's, you know, that's another complicated factor. But if you could just maybe, if there are other things that maybe a community could think about that we could participate in to make it safer for everybody. I'll mute myself and wait for an answer. Thank you.
I can jump in on that. Thanks, Dan. And I want to thank you for being in touch right after this. And also I know for you and for other school leaders right in the area and all the families, this has been, you know, folks are really trying to figure out, to sort of make sense of this and also figure out what happened and how to prevent further incidents. So appreciate your leadership. And also want to say we just have arranged, we're arranging a meeting with the Lycée school community, and happy to, with Urban or any other school, come out and have a more school specific meeting. I think it's a really great question. I mean, we know that the short-term police presence, you know, is there in the immediate aftermath, as Captain Pedrini has talked about, and I appreciate his candor on this. Right, it's not a long-term sustainable thing, and unfortunately, something will occur somewhere else in the city that feels equally hot and dangerous, and there will be you know, calls to move some of these resources around. I think, you know, I do think there's a range of things that can be done in the short term. You know, certainly, you know, I think the most immediate thing from my office's perspective is figuring out and getting as much information we can about these two shootings so that we can look at what kind of prevention efforts work. Things look really different depending what the details are. You know, were there known relationships between folks shooting at each other, or, you know, how much is this specific to a block because of something on that block versus that folks happen to be on that block and it could be anywhere. I think one of the challenges is getting information about the incidents, because with ongoing investigations, but for our office, in terms of what to push for, some of it depends on the details that are coming out about the incident. There are other things that do help. They're not going to stop someone who is determined to shoot someone. I want to be clear about that. But we are trying to get the community ambassador program going, which are additional eyes on the street, which we think are helpful. The merchants generally have cameras is another thing that can sometimes help and be a deterrent, visible cameras especially. And I know a lot of the merchants right around the most recent shooting actually did have camera footage, but that's another thing that folks who don't have that can add. And there was some discussion in our merchants meeting about possibly networking some of these cameras together so information can be shared. And then lastly, I would really recommend SF Safe, which is a nonprofit that helps folks in a whole range of ways to basically prevent crime, whether it's at your business or if you're a resident, to shore up your security of your home, to look at what kind of tips there can be in just how you are in the neighborhood, to try to prevent being a victim of crime. And they will do a free consult with a business or directly with residents. So those would be some resources that I'd recommend short term.
Thank you, Supervisor Preston. I do have another set of questions now. Next is Dennis, if we want to unmute Dennis so he can ask his question. And then after that will be a question from Kat and Richard.
Well, thank you. The captain indicated that there were identified cars that come through various neighborhoods, including the Haight. And what I don't understand is if these cars have been identified and we know that they're coming into various neighborhoods, why can't they be traced in some way? Hello? Were you able to hear my question?
Yes, Dennis, thank you.
Looking for.
I mean, the captain was talking about that there had been the same cars identified in various neighborhoods doing these attacks. And if the cars have been identified, is there not any way to trace them in some way? I mean,
Yeah. Hi, Dennis. It's Chris Pedrini. I was trying to answer you, but I was not able to unmute myself. So now I'm unmuted. So that's a very good point. The way we would trace them normally is through license plate. We have a very good description of the cars. But this is the interesting part, is that ever since the state has gone to the paper license plate system, it seems that they either steal those plates or they steal license plates. They figured out that they've changed them frequently. It's much more difficult to track. So we don't have any way to track them. With some cities, other cities around the nation have license plate reading technology all over the city. We don't have that. So we have to go by the description of the vehicle and then the license plate. So our officers see it, and then we compare that license plate to the license plates that have been hitting. And like I said, frequently they will change the license plate. They do it on a very regular basis. So we start to look at the behavior, and then sometimes make educated guesses and assumptions that this is the same vehicle based on description. And then sometimes when we do run the license plate, we do find out it's, say, for example, there was a Dodge Charger driving around doing this 2 weeks ago. You run the plate, it comes back to a Toyota Corolla. Okay, now we get the idea that it's a stolen plate. So a lot of times the people that are registered owners of those plates don't even know they were stolen. So it is a challenge. It ups the degree of difficulty to track the vehicles, but we do put out every single day. We put out a list of the vehicles that are known recently to be doing these.
I mean, is there some effort to track something other than by license plate?
We track by description. We have a list of description and license plate.
And have not been able to identify any source of any of the cars so far?
Sometimes when we do recover them, we're able to, yes.
Oh, I see. The cars are stolen or something. Okay, thank you.
Sometimes they're stolen, sometimes they're rentals, and sometimes they actually are owned by the perpetrators, but they have stolen license plates or altered those fake, the dealer type license plates, the paper ones.
Oh, thank you. I can see it's a big problem. Thank you, Captain. Appreciate
Sure.
it.
Thank you, Dennis. And before we continue, I just wanted to let David and Bruce know that someone hopped on to tell me that the link to this meeting has been shared on a website that's invited people to come Zoom bomb us. So their recommendation was to not admit additional people, just as an FYI, if you want to be aware. I know we have the mute enabled now, so even if we do see people popping up in the chat, they won't be able to speak. but they may be able to display an image for their, you know, without the video. Okay, so next we have a question from Kat and Richard. Do we want to unmute them so they can ask their questions?
Actually, Tess was next.
Oh, I apologize. I thought I had Kat and Richard next. Tess and then Kat, Richard.
Okay. The Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council put together elements of effective community policing for our district in January of 2010. We have about 30,000 people in the Haight-Ashbury, 1/3 of them visitors at most times. And we feel that community policing, having people walking around on Haight Street, in the Panhandle, and in the closer in park, Golden Gate Park, and related streets around the Haight, creates a police presence that doesn't take a lot of manpower or shall I say staff power, and would be very helpful to the neighborhood. And it seems like this gets implemented every now and then it goes away. I don't think we need to have the command control van and several officers tied up for hours, but we do need to have connections with different institutions in the Haight, and especially beat cops. So I wanted to bring up that is a policy that we have put forward and would like to see carried out in the Haight by the police department and in conjunction with neighborhood institutions. So
Thank
Captain
you.
Pedrini, do you have any thoughts about that? And Dean as well.
Yes, thank you for that question. I do have to leave in a few minutes. I just want to let everybody know, but I'll try to answer this question briefly. So, you know, this increase in presence right now was extremely robust, and including the command van. Now that's not gonna, like I said, that's not gonna last. That van is needed elsewhere. That literally can become a dispatch center or a police station, that van. So I just made it my office for a few days through the weekend, and then it will be needed elsewhere. So that's going to go away. But the presence, we're going to have to adjust. And we have had a turnover in footbeat officers. We currently have 6 that are assigned to the footbeat on Haight Street. However, one of them unfortunately blew out his Achilles tendon, so he's out for a little while. And another one got hurt in a felony hit and run with a stolen vehicle. He was rear-ended by a stolen vehicle in the East Bay, and he's still injured. So we're down a little bit. So we've brought in, like I said, we brought in some outside resources to help. We're just going to have to adjust those numbers until we find the right fit. We do have some resource constraints in terms of staffing numbers at Park Station. We have to staff our car sectors to be able to respond to calls for service. The one thing I've been talking about is footbeats are fantastic. They're great. But in the homicide that occurred at Haight Masonic, we had an officer on foot about 3 blocks away. So it's not the end all be all. We have to have officers in vehicles too. And really is the presence, it's that balancing act. So we just have to find what that is. It's not going to always be sufficient, but we just have to constantly make those adjustments. And I'm always happy to hear about what everybody is thinking about. Somebody just put in bikes and motorcycles. So we do have some officers that are bike trained. We are trying to increase our bike training. Believe it or not, you have to go to training to become a bicycle trained officer. So we are having those trainings. There should be one here in the mid part of November that we'll get a few more officers trained at. And then I did get a commitment from our motorcycle officers that they will be out on the Haight Street corridor in the coming weeks. So you'll see motorcycle ultras out there as well. With that said, I have to
Thank
leave.
you.
But thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Captain Pedrini, for joining us. So I know Kat and Richard, you also had questions. I'm not sure if they were for Captain Pedrini or for Dean. But I did also want to give space to Dean to talk about slow streets and some other alternatives to how we might address some of the challenges that we're having on Haight Street itself. I think I think what I heard from you last night was that you're open to all ideas and suggestions on different tactics and techniques we might use to make our community safer. And one thing that you and I have discussed is whether or not it makes sense to request Haight Street become a slow street on an emergency basis. And I think that was an interesting idea that is going to have a lot of complicated reactions, but I thought this would be a good forum to at least flesh that out in terms of people's interest or concerns in that as well.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, and so there were a number of things I was thinking to give updates on. I don't know if you want to sort of limit the discussion around the public safety issues that I know have been obviously are most urgent to folks. I don't think I obviously have been a big fan of the slow street on Page Street. I don't think there's been any kind of proposal to do something like that on Haight. Obviously, it's a transit. It's a transit street, and we've been fighting. That's part of the other updates is some good news on getting some buses back, and so I don't know how feasible that would be. I think the point I made last night, and I think what your question was getting at, is just that you look for like what, when you're thinking creatively about like how to disrupt and prevent this kind of crime in a neighborhood, you look at what are some of the commonalities, right? And right now the MO for a lot of this is it's ready availability of weapons, right? And we know that some of the things that we would want to do as a city were sort of blocked by federal law, NRA inspired laws that prevent us from taking more steps to ban ghost guns and other things that are becoming so easily available. But the other thing that is common to every one of these is someone's pulling up in a vehicle, right? Like, so the getaway vehicle, the ability to like be in a car, jump out, hit another car, or if they're targeting someone either for robbery or to shoot, it is something that I don't know what the solution is, right? I think we just started kind of thinking about that. I think there were some interesting points yesterday raised by some folks in Hayes Valley around around proximity to the freeway, and how and asking how much of this, including the shooting down at Haight and Buchanan, like how much of this is folks being able to access, is this coming through the lower Haight, Hayes Valley, in part because of easy access to and from the freeway. So I don't think I'm certainly not in a position right now to be proposing some kind of broader limit on vehicles in the neighborhood. But I do think when we're looking at more creative ways to potentially disrupt this, it's not just about identifying vehicles, it's also, that is part of the crime essentially that we're seeing with every one of these, perhaps less so with the home burglaries, but certainly in terms of the auto break-ins and these shootings, they've all been folks pulling up, jumping out of a car, or shooting from a vehicle.
Yeah, and it's kind of shocking how rapidly we've had to respond to a series of incidents, and part of it makes me wonder how much of it is media created and how much of it is also real, because I don't know that the other incidents besides the two that happened in Haight-Ashbury proper were really Haight-Ashbury, but the media called them Haight-Ashbury incidents. So
yeah, everything's being called. I've certainly noticed that, and I'm not going to quibble with folks around a few blocks, but I agree that it's not helpful, I think, certainly for the businesses and others, you know, it's bad enough that we've had 2 shootings right on Haight Street, right near each other, you know, in such a short period of time. But it is, yeah, when they characterize it as the hate, when you had something over on Hayes and in North Panhandle, and then the shooting down in Hayes Valley, it could
It's
be more
hard to
precise.
decide how
It's
much
still
of that-
concern. Yeah, it's still, I mean,
Yeah.
look, it's still equally concerning to have shootings, you know, and
Absolutely.
including one that was a homicide, you know, down in Hayes Valley. But it is a little loose for folks to call anything that occurs sort of west of Van Ness and not in the Fillmore as the hate.
Exactly. And we were getting a bit of a media frenzy there. I know merchants were being approached, you know, by multiple news outlets constantly over the weekend. And that in of itself has been an interesting phenomenon. So I do think that it's important for us to kind of try to create some distance and really analyze what's happening and trying to craft policy solutions, right? So I do
Karen
want.
had a question.
Yeah. So I was just gonna confirm, Supervisor Preston, do we have you until 9 o'clock tonight?
I thought it was till 8:30. I can push it a little, but definitely
That's
plan
great. I
to
just
do with you
wanted
for an
to
hour. Yeah.
make sure that we were giving space for the other topic updates that we want to do. I think we wanted to still give time to Kat and Richard and Karen for their questions on the safety incidents, if that's okay.
Sure.
So Kat and Richard, do you want to pose your questions? I think you had 2.
Yeah, my question was actually to Captain Pedrini. It seemed like he didn't discuss the most recent incident and wondered if he had anything to say, but I don't know if he's still here.
Which incident is that? You can name it.
Is Richard back on mute?
Yeah, I unmuted. Asked you to unmute, Richard. I asked Captain Petrini to unmute. He might be away now though.
He did say he had to leave, so he might be
said
listening in the background.
Are you talking about the Hayes?
No, I'm talking about the incident on Haight Street just this week. It's a homicide, so might be in investigations. He might not be able to say much, but it seemed like he didn't discuss it.
What happened?
He did. He briefly mentioned. Yeah, he briefly mentioned it, Richard, and he did also specifically say that the person that passed away on Thursday was one of the people that had exited the vehicle, and so the other person that has been hospitalized, I believe, was the target of the men in the vehicle. And there were a number of witnesses and a number of video cameras, and so there's quite a lot that they are now investigating to try to identify the other men that were in the vehicle. And I know that he hasn't mentioned it in yesterday's meeting or today, but he mentioned it on Monday, is that they did stop a vehicle that matched the description of the vehicle in the Castro that was engaged in some type of property crime, and they did make an arrest, and they're investigating whether they can connect that individual to Thursday's shooting. So I don't know if there's more I can answer around that incident. I'm probably more versed in it than I want to be, but if there's specific questions you have about what happened on that Thursday, I can try to elaborate where the captain didn't. Is Richard unmuted?
No, that's fine. I thought he mentioned a few of the others and not that one, so that's fine.
He mentioned it briefly, but said that the investigations asked him not to speak about
And
it.
I think that's the challenge. And, you know, Richard, probably why you missed some of it is the information coming out is extremely limited. You know, I mean, then the
Yes.
captain has been clear about this, so just giving pretty basic minimal information. Obviously, there are folks on the street, folks who are witnessing, you know, and so others in the neighborhood probably in some ways have more information than the department is gonna officially release. It is for us a challenge. I fully understand and respect why investigators will not release details around that as they're learning them. At the same time, as I've said before, it makes a difference what we're finding in terms of, you know, is there a connection to a person who lives on the block? Is there a connection to a business on the block? Is there a, right, those kind of details, which they're not going to release if they're doing an investigation, to us are very important in terms of like assessing the risk level and looking at what the solutions are. And I'm sure, and the captain mentioned this in the meeting last night, around the limits on what they will put out. And, you know, I mean, my understanding of those is it's, you know, it's not just, you know, you have serious risks of putting out information, right? What, you know, you can disclose information around suspects, around vehicles and so forth that enables the people who are being investigated to get rid of evidence. That's a serious concern. And another concern is shaping witness testimony. Right. So you put something out there saying, I'm just making it up, you know, so-and-so had a tattoo of an American flag or whatever on his left, whatever. And that's in the media. And then all of a sudden people say that, you know, now you're shaping the witness testimony. Now their testimony becomes unreliable. Right. So those are the kind of things where they're not wrong to restrict that information. It's just a reality in these cases, but it creates, and I think one of the reasons we've tried to have these have a bunch of community meetings right after is when you don't get this information from the investigators, creates a lot of space for misinformation, right? And so you, I mean, and you all have seen it, you're on whatever, next door, on, you know, on social media, and people are just, the rumor mill's going. So we've tried to kind of tamp that down and get accurate info, but I just do want to sympathize with, I think, the frustration around not getting more of these details. And in some ways, your most reliable, I don't know how reliable, but there's someone you trust who was on the block that day and you're talking to them, you're probably getting more information right now than you're going to get from any government source. And a lot of us were out there. You know, I mean, we weren't there at the moment. My office, Jembo, was, you know, out there as soon as we learned of this and spent the afternoon there. And then I was chairing a committee hearing, and as soon as it was over, it came out. But we weren't there at the time of the incident. But as Kristen said, there was a lot of video footage and a lot of folks who you all know who were witnesses as well.
Yeah, there were a lot of witnesses that day. So, you know, as a merchant association, we have told our members not to talk to one another so that they don't compromise witness testimony. But obviously we have to do what we have to do in order to ensure community safety as well. So those conversations, I'm open to talking to anyone who wants to talk one-on-one. I probably won't talk on a public meeting with a recording. That's okay. Okay, so I think there was one last question from Karen, but I wanted to then move on after that to other topics. Karen, did you have a pressing question for Supervisor Preston?
Well, it feels pressing to me.
I understand.
Yeah, I was wondering what the status was of it's called CARD or CART. I can never remember which one, that was funded and was going to put trained civilians in place of police responding to mental health calls for assistance. And I don't know where it stands. I don't know if we are able to take advantage of that out here, thus freeing up police since there's such a shortage. And if there's any pressure that's needed to get it moving if it's not moving now.
Thanks, Karen. So the CART program that you're talking about is it's not really a replacement for law enforcement. I mean, it really is an attempt to connect in a more holistic way to provide services to folks who are unhoused. There is something called the Street Crisis Response Team, or SCIRT, which in some ways is a little more of a direct, I think, replacement for what often historically has been police coming out when someone's in crisis on the streets, and having less of a police response there, and having these street crisis response teams come out. So that is in effect, and they are empowered to go anywhere in the city. So, but they are specifically for folks who are in crisis, right? And like an emergency situation. And one of the things that CART, which is not just for crisis, beyond just the crisis of someone living on the street, but CART is a community-based solution with folks from nonprofits and service providers and others who can provide more comprehensive care and case management and so forth for folks on the street. That program is held up. It was funded in the budget process with millions of dollars, so the money is there. And so far, the administration has not been willing to release those funds and start the program. And it's one of the very strange things about our city and the budgeting process is there's kind of sometimes two fights. One is to get the money, and then the other is to get the departments that the Board of Supervisors did not control to spend that money. And I will say that I did not realize before entering City Hall as a supervisor how much it would take sometimes to simply get money that's already been allocated, that's in the budget, actually spent, but you kind of can't force it. And so if it's an area of interest, I would urge folks to like pressure around getting, talk to the Coalition on Homelessness in particular, has really been leading the effort. Kristen's been, involved from day one on that, and like just really, and our office totally supports it. So, but folks need to hear that it's needed, because it absolutely is, and it's like part of any real solution to homelessness. But Kristen, I don't know if you have a different view, but I don't know that there's as much of a direct replacement of police response with CART. I think that's more of the SCIRT, the crisis response teams.
Yeah, so interesting is Mayor Breed did muddy the waters, not only with SCIRT, but an announcement about SWIRT. I don't know if you have also heard about the street wellness response teams. So, when CART had been conceived, they looked at the 911 call data and they identified who would be responding to the different types of call. And there's 3 types of tiers of calls, A, B, C. And so CART was identified to be, essentially tackling those C-level calls. And the mayor has announced that she'd like to fund SWIRT teams, street wellness response teams, that would take some of those C-level calls that CART was specifically targeting. So, I think that she muddied the waters, and a lot of it, the resistance was coming from the bureaucracy, from the fire department in particular, who, was questioning whether or not community response would be trained in EMT practices and that they would certify them. So there's been a number of hearings on this, and I know that it won't be the last that we hear about it. And of course, good to know is that all of this is being funded by Prop C. Even though it was originally discussed that we should get rid of the police response to homelessness by defunding the police, or taking a portion of the police budget and allocating it towards non-police response. All of that is coming from the resources that were secured for Prop C. So that's another important part of the equation, is how do we pay for it all? I want to transition, and speaking of how difficult it is once you go through the budget cycle and get something approved in the budget, but then the departments decide not to spend the money, I think is an excellent transition to what's going on with 730 Stanyon, the interim use. And if we could go ahead and have an update from you, Supervisor Preston, on that, and then In terms of other topics that we advertised that we would discuss tonight, we also said we would discuss the bus lines, the muni lines. And then I figured you'd also want to give an update on the eviction-free District 5. And the floor is yours after that if there's other topics you want to cover. So please go ahead.
All right, so that's a bunch of ground to cover. I will try to keep it relatively short, but I can't promise to do it in like the 2 minutes that we usually give people for public comment at the Board of Supervisors. So take a little more than that, but feel free to cut me off, or, you know, if you want to return to questions.
Maybe we'll do Q&A between each of the topics. So
I mean, if it's okay, maybe I'm just afraid we'll run out of time. So maybe, Kristen, if it's okay, if I could just run through this, you know, probably there's a handful of topics, maybe just give the main updates on those, and then open it up to and if you want to organize Q&A by topic, that's fine. But let me just give, you know, sort of the big kind of, you know, 4, 5, 6 things to update. And one, before we go any further, we talked about obviously the public safety issues. I won't go back through that. And those are obviously really pressing right now. I did want to note, you know, in good news for all of you who are parents like me of kids under 12 years old, that now 5 to 11-year-olds can now be vaccinated. So that was the news as of last week. And I just wanted to make sure folks not only know that, but also are persistent in trying to get appointments. I've been hearing, and my own experience was that each day new appointments are being released. So if you went on a few days ago to try to get your kid vaccinated, it might have told you have to wait 3 weeks. And then if you go on the next day, you can find something the same week. So that's, you know, really just such a huge relief for parents of young kids right now, especially with kids back in school. So I just did want to start by reminding folks about that piece of good news. The muni lines, I'm not used to having relatively good news on muni these days. I've been in what seems like at least 1 year battle with the MTA around bringing back bus lines. I think they will not say it, but to anyone who has been watching, it is pretty clear that the plan was to phase out what they call parallel or duplicative lines. I absolutely 100% disagree with that strategy. I think we are a transit-rich district. It's a wonderful thing that we have bus lines every handful of blocks, and the rest of the city should do that too. But they shouldn't be taking away District 5 bus lines. There were, of the 5 lines that MTA that was suspended and the MTA was not committing to bring back, they all served the Western Addition in Japantown. So this became a major issue for our office. We held hearings, 4-hour hearing on this in the committee I chair. I really had an ongoing battle with MTA. The long story short, and the good news is MTA in the last couple of weeks came out with their draft recommendations for service restoration. And it ain't perfect, but it is a huge reversal. And I want to give them credit for, finally listening. It brings back most of the lines and would be a big step forward. We did a resolution at the board that I authored saying that the Board of Supervisors wanted these lines back by the end of the year. That is not going to happen, but we're not that far off. They are proposing to bring back every line except 2 in the city just by February 2022. And specifically, and I think most relevant for folks in the Haight, the number 6 line, which I think was absolutely on the chopping block, is going to return if MTA approves this plan in December. It will return in February. They're proposing it to run at a very low frequency, once every 20 minutes. And you were trying to secure a commitment, and they have said that that's not the long-term plan, that as the staffing allows, that they will increase that frequency. I have thought from the start of this that bringing the lines back is absolutely crucial first step. We can lobby for and fight for more frequency. We can fight for the full line if it's a partial line, but not having the line and getting everyone used to not having the line is extremely dangerous in terms of permanently losing those lines. So the 6 will return to its full route in February if this plan is approved, again at low frequencies. The 21 will return at every 15-minute frequency in February, and it will not go all the way downtown. It will go to the Civic Center BART. So it'll go Stanion down to Civic Center BART. We trying to secure a commitment that as staffing will allow, it will go all the way downtown, but so far have not gotten that. So we need folks to continue to speak out on this. The MTA board will consider on December 7th whether to adopt these proposed plans. Also want to note the number 2 Clement is coming back, a partial route, but is coming back. So that serves Japantown. And the only 2 lines that currently are not slated to come back starting in February are the number 3 Jackson, which and the number 47 on Van Ness. Those are the only 2 that there's no promise to return them. Moving on to other topics, did one quick thing on affordable housing. Wanted to let everyone know and thank you so much for all your support of Prop I. The Prop I revenues are looking really strong for this year. They were projected at $128 million. They already in the first 4 months of the year are over $80 million. So we may well be on track to over $200 million in revenue as a result of Prop I for this year. That's the good news in terms of revenues for affordable housing. The bad news is, or the question is, how's that money going to be spent? And I just introduced a $64 million appropriation to fund in a really robust way and have really the first significant pot of money dedicated to acquisitions for small site acquisitions for community land trusts. And I know Bruce is on and has been at the heart of a lot of those efforts. So it's really an exciting appropriation. It'll be in the budget committee on the 17th. And urge folks to call in support of that. We expect, we don't know, but if prior statements are an indication, we are concerned about a possible mayoral veto. So we need to get up to at least 8 votes on the Board of Supervisors to override a veto if she's gonna do that. And then we'll keep fighting for all the rest of the Prop I money for affordable housing. The other big updates, the eviction-free D5 campaign that Kristen mentioned, is we have now reached out to tens of thousands of tenants in District 5. We declared District 5 an eviction-free zone. Jennifer Boland, Jembo, who's on this call and is your liaison from the Haight to our office, has been helping to lead the efforts on the outreach on the eviction-free campaign. We launched this because even though there is not a clear ban on all kinds of evictions, when you piece it together, there is virtually no eviction that should be moving forward right now. So evictions for health and safety can move forward. Ellis Act evictions were preempted. Those can move forward. Everything else, if people know their rights and how to access resources, everything else should be stopped. All the non-payment evictions, there are funds for COVID back rent, some of which we fought for and won in the budget process, some of which are through the federal government, through the state. If a tenant applies for those, an eviction for non-payment cannot proceed at that time. All other kinds of evictions, owner moving, capital improvement evictions, demolitions, substantial rehabilitation, you name it, we have a moratorium in place through the end of this year. So really, as I say, almost every eviction should not be happening, but people need to know what their rights are. And people also need to know how to access the rent relief. And so that's why we've been doing this outreach. And we've also been doing tenant rights boot camps. We ramped those up and have done several in the last month already. And have had really good attendance of folks coming out. So once folks know their rights right now, they should be secure, at least for the time being. And plus, it's not just for the tenants, it's also the landlords get that rent money through the program, although it's been pretty slow.
And there is a lit drop, Supervisor Preston, there's a lit drop for eviction free D5 this Sunday at noon. I believe the meeting spot is in Hayes Valley. I'm not clear on what the exact location is.
Excellent. So, I don't know the details. I know Pat Cochran has been organizing some of those. So I assume that info is through him. You can always contact Jen Bo in our office for further information on that. Yeah. And thanks for mentioning that. And then I did want to just maybe end here in my updates on the really two key homelessness items, one 730 Stanyon, the other, the federal reimbursements on SIP hotels. So there was an announcement just this week that the federal government is extending its reimbursement on a number of things, including reimbursing the shelter-in-place SIP hotels. So that's been extended a few times. There's been a bit of a tension between the board and the mayor as to whether to wind down these hotels or not, with the board pushing to keep them open as long as possible. They were slated to run out of funding this year. Now that's going to be extended through April as part of the COVID emergency response. So that's great news. Thank you, President Biden, and folks in FEMA, and that's the single biggest thing in terms of impacting how many people end up having to live on the streets of San Francisco right now are how many hotel rooms we can continue to provide, paid for by the federal government, right? There's lots of other, between our City Our Home money, Project Home Key money, there's other sources of money for different things, but the SIP hotel program, we're getting 100% reimbursement on eligible residents, vulnerable residents. And that's, got thousands of folks housed throughout the pandemic. So, hopefully, we need to keep pushing to keep those hotels open. But that's good news. In the not good news category, 730 Stanyon, and I know you all have been following this. It's been a constant battle to activate interim use there. Real resistance from the mayor's administration to the community plan that was presented when we came into office. We were trying to get some elements of the CCC plan going that I know HANC backed. Then COVID hit. Everything went on ice, and then we opened the safe sleeping site there with the administration and our office, everyone fully supporting. That was extended a couple times and then wound down as promised to neighborhood, and looking like things might be cooling off a little on the COVID need. Then, obviously the summer with Delta and everything, things, we wound down the safe sleeping site in June. Placed most folks either in permanent housing or another safe sleep site. A lot of work went into that. We were promised at the time that as part of the city's ongoing emergency response, that they would continue to provide services there, even though it would not be a safe sleeping site. We negotiated those details, insisted that include bathrooms, that include showers, hand washing stations, as well as some kind of structured trailer, something for a service provider to provide information and referrals, particularly focusing on transitional age youth, TAY, homeless folks. That was the plan. We were promised that was what was going to happen. Some of you were alarmed in, I believe it was July, when in the night, the bathrooms and the showers and everything disappeared. We called and raised the alarm on that and were assured, oh, no, that's just because that contract was too expensive and we're going to bring in new ones. Everything's all set, the plumbing, everything's good to go. Everything has been good to go with that program all the way through. You all were a lot of you were at the community meeting where HSH laid out in great detail, here's what we're doing there. They issued and because it's part of the emergency response, they didn't have to do a full RFP process. They did an expedited request for providers who were going to provide these services. Homeless Youth Alliance applied, were selected for that. Everything was good to go. We were originally told it was going to start in September. I then got a very apologetic call from HSH informing me that it was going to be October, but guaranteed by October 31st at the latest, things would be up and running. And then in late October, the plug was pulled. And Homeless Youth Alliance was advised it would not move forward, and we were advised it would not move forward. The reasons given are quite contradictory, don't make a lot of sense. Can go into the details if folks want it in questions, but basically, you know, there's a few possibilities, but clearly a decision higher up was made that this was not going to happen. We didn't accept that decision, and I've taken the pretty unusual step of calling for a hearing in the Government Audit and Oversight Committee to look into the details of and get explanations as to why the sudden reversal and how we get this moving as promised to our office and as promised to the community. That will occur next Thursday, a week from today at 10 a.m. and folks are welcome to call in for that hearing. So as of now, despite the promises to do this, the administration is saying no activation of 730 Stanion for homeless services and no commitments for any other use either. Our plan all along was to like get the homeless services going, but also then look at what we can layer on top of that now that we have at least a year and a half, probably more, to not look at an empty lot.
So Dean, I have to say a few words.
Please. I'm done.
okay.
Those are I hate to end on that note, but those are my updates. There's obviously a lot going on, but I will stop there.
Yeah, I listened to your question and answer with the mayor on Tuesday and was floored, where she essentially mentioned multiple times that it was not a popular use with the community, and that clearly seemed to be a factor that they were not being forthcoming about. And you know, obviously one group that had started a petition in opposition is claiming victory on their social media. So it's really problematic, and I look forward to the hearing. And Alice Mosley was asking, why can we not just go ahead and get the construction going?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the developers can do, I mean, they're submitting the plans, they're getting their approvals. They obviously did the on-site, you know, they're going through the due diligence, right? Of like, they did the on-site day where folks come through, they did some testing that we asked them to do more quickly so we could launch the services on site. So they did that in July. They're, you know, applying for funding. I mean, one of the things that happened here, I mean, I have been supportive of doing the bigger project, but unfortunately that decision was made like a year later, right? The most CD decided with no real notice to anyone to substantially increase the size, add 30 units, you know, do a bigger project. Again, that's a decision I support. Is actually something, you know, that I suggested a year ago, and we were told could not be done because of funding. 9 months after that, somehow the funding magically appears. There's always funding for, frankly, what the mayor's office wants to do, and there's never funding for what they don't want to do. And there was, so they came up with the funding and committed to do it. But the problem is that basically created a 1-year delay. That put things back a year, because now the developers had to redesign the property according to these new specs and go back to the community and so forth. So I don't think there's been any additional delays, but that's the delay. I mean, that's the pretty much 1-year delay is going to be because MoCD decided to do this, change the plans a year later. And I think it was the right move to change the plans, but I wish they'd done it a year before. In fairness, it's also the middle of a global pandemic, and they're dealing with a lot of things. So I don't want to be too harsh on how rapidly they did that, but it is a factor in the delays.
Okay, and I see we now have initiated a very excited discussion in the chat, and then Calvin Welch has raised his hand. Calvin, shall we unmute Calvin?
Thank you. Yes, Supervisor, I believe that the situation that we're in right now really is the beginning of the struggle for what is going to be built at that site. The permanent use, the interim battle, the battle over interim uses has gone on for now, 4 years. At no time has the city met a commitment made to the community by the Mayor's Office of Housing. Not one deadline has been met, not one plan has been met over the interim uses. And we're now, you're absolutely correct, the decision of Mo to add 2 floors to the building after the community planning process during COVID was completed has added a year and several $1 million in cost to the project. But that's what is before us now is the permanent project. And I would hope that your support would be there to make the project as relevant to the place that it is in as is possible. We need real help in marketing the units to seniors. There can be no reservation of senior units, but only affirmative marketing, and we need your office and the city's help in assuring that that happens. We also need assurances that there will be support for both the neighborhood serving commercial and nonprofit uses at the ground floor. We need to start talking about what's going to be built. It's going to be 120 units of housing that is critically needed, with spaces for critical services. And we have to make sure that that actually meets the needs of not only this neighborhood, but the wider community of District 5. So looking forward to the help and commitment that you have always given to 730 Stanton, but now addressing how we're going to make the building work for this community and this district.
Thanks, Calvin, and thanks for your leadership on the, all the, not only the interim use, but the longer term housing. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, our office will certainly, we've heard loud and clear and share the views around the priority populations, particularly for seniors. And I think we all understand some limitations around designating these specifically as senior units, as you said, and which would trigger a whole bunch of other requirements. But those limits are not there on marketing, as you say, to seniors, and having a really robust plan to do that. And I do think, I agree around neighborhood serving businesses and nonprofits. I do think there's a relationship on some of the interim services. I just do want to identify a bit of a thread through why it's remained vacant so long, why HSH and the administration has pulled the plug on temporary services, and the, I think, determination of some in the neighborhood to block everything from the safe sleeping site to any homeless services in the neighborhood. And I think we have to acknowledge that and recognize that that dynamic and difference of opinion is not going away, and will continue also when we start talking about the nonprofits and neighborhood and services being provided, in the permanent building. And so one of the reasons that I want to tackle this at the board is partly because we urgently need services yesterday on that site and elsewhere in the Haight, but also because we need to know what's going on around commitments. I mean, what good are commitments from the administration if, as you say, they're going to renege on them? And so we need to know what's driving those decisions. I think it's fairly clear, and just to name the dynamic or the kind of elephant in the room is two different visions of how you address homelessness. One which argues that we should not have services available to people who are homeless in the neighborhood, and that they, under the idea that they will somehow go somewhere to some other neighborhood or be moved to some other neighborhood, versus a vision that is about providing services to meet the needs of folks who are homeless. And I think that was the debate that played out when we launched the Safe Sleep site. I think any questions, and frankly, many fair-minded people who were skeptics about the Safe Sleep site months later acknowledged that how positive it was for everyone in the neighborhood to have those services and a place for people to be, and the showers and the supervision and all the things that site offered. And that's the solution. I mean, our office differs from my last two predecessors in the view on that. And we are absolutely committed 100% to continuing to make sure that we have services to serve the homeless population and support the homeless population and get folks, help folks get off the streets and into housing. And I think the interim use is related to that. And also the reasons, like, is this correct when you see a group like Safe Healthy Haight that formed recently to oppose the safe sleeping site and partnered with and supported the lawsuits and all the efforts to stop that, and they're claiming they are responsible for the sudden abandonment of the interim use plan. It's easy to say that on a website. I don't know if that's true or not. That's what a hearing is for. We were also told by HSH that suddenly they don't have the money for this program, which is doesn't add up. And when I said, well, if we get the money separate from your department, can we launch it? They said no. So so it's not about the money. So what's going on? And we're gonna dive in a hearing, and that's our role on the board, is to exercise oversight. But that's a long way of saying yes to your question and comment, Calvin. But I do think these things are related. I don't think we can just accept the interim services, all this being killed now, because these things will continue to be tensions as we look at what kind of services are provided in the commercial parts of that building.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you for your commitment. I know you campaigned on getting a navigation center to D5, and then we had a pandemic, and the 730 Stanyan camp was, a response to an emergency and a health crisis, but it provided an opportunity for us to prove that one of the major criticisms that people had, that people would not accept services. 730 Stanyan had a wait list the entire time it was in operation, from the get-go. And we knew that people would go in with a culturally competent provider and come off of Haight Street and into a safe space for them to connect with services, a place for them to sleep and get much needed rest. And we saw people exit to positive outcomes, to job training programs and to other stable housing solutions. And I think that in of itself was the silver lining of the pandemic for our neighborhood. And I appreciate your continued fight and creating transparency around this issue, and know that it's a very divisive issue for this community, and one that is the reason why we have so many different groups that purport to represent the neighborhood. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I think, framing and talking about the silver lining, I mean, we have seen a handful of things, right, that came out of necessity in the pandemic, but that really did succeed in addressing a need. And you're right, we came into office talking about a navigation center and wanting to do that. When you look at what we actually did, it was pandemic driven responses. So 730 Stanton, a safe sleep site was one. The other thing, we transformed the emergency drop-in shelter system of District 5, which was, the First Friendship Church was where all families is only drop-in emergency shelter for families. Everyone was sleeping on mats on a floor next to each other, no showers. Everyone had to be out at 7 a.m. It was just not a good situation pre-pandemic, but in the pandemic, it was a disaster because everyone's sleeping right next to each other. I mean, you can't have that with a communicable disease. Bethel AME Church had a women's shelter, emergency shelter, had some similar challenges, right, just during the pandemic. So we ended up, that's when we got the Oasis Hotel, did the first effectively shelter in place hotel. That part of the updates I should have given you is that that's now going to be permanent. So we have taken what was a congregate shelter for homeless families as an emergency shelter where folks are sleeping on mats on a floor, and moved that whole thing for not just now for the pandemic, but on a permanent ongoing basis. Those families, a lot of those families are still in the Oasis. They were moved from First Friendship to the Oasis during the pandemic. A lot of them are still there, and others that will be effectively the new shelter. So that's become, it's not quite a navigation center, but it's pretty similar in a lot of ways, except that folks have been able to stay there longer. But that's just, another example where we certainly weren't planning that at the outset. And to recognize that some of this is the federal money has been helpful in keeping these things going, right? When you actually have the federal government stepping in a more major way. It took a global pandemic and public health crisis, but that's what the federal government should be doing.
And to clarify, with the announcement that FEMA funding will be extending until April 2022, is there any hearings or resolutions that the Board of Supervisors will be taking up around that? I know the shelter-in-place hotels, from their peak at 25, they've already closed 8 of them, and they were planning to close 2 more in December, which seems kind of crazy given the fact that we lack emergency shelter. There's no shelter wait list. When the shelter wait list was closed, there were over 1,000 people on it. We're in the expected to have a very wet winter, and we are unfortunately appears to be on another rising surge of the coronavirus. Doesn't it make sense to not only keep the shelter-in-place hotels open, to stop them from closing anymore, and as they transition people into permanent housing, filling those vacancies up with people from the street? I've encountered people who are seniors and have health issues that would benefit from a shelter-in-place hotel, even if it's for only 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely no reason to be winding these down. And I think that, the city has hard choices to make when the federal subsidy stops, right? And when you're actually looking, I mean, there's still significant reserves, COVID reserves. I mean, these do not need to be wound down for financial reasons for a while. But, look, there will come a time, maybe they'll get extended again after April. I don't know. We have to see, is there going to be another surge? What's happening nationally? So, but at some point, that money will probably dry up unless there's a new federal program to step in. Some of these properties can be purchased, right, through the Project Home Key and some of the new opportunities at the state level. But again, I mean, some of these, at some point, there's going to be a difficult question of, do you use your funds to keep a shelter going, right? Or do you invest those funds into permanent supportive housing? Or there are a lot of different views on that, and the goal is to do both, right? But I think certainly there's no question whether we're able to do both right now, given the state Project Home Key money, our City Our Home money, and the federal reimbursements. It's literally all of this is being, it strikes me as, even for a fiscal conservative, one of the cruelest things imaginable right now to suggest closing a shelter-in-place hotel that is reimbursed 100% by the federal government. That makes absolutely no sense. And to your question of whether we will have that at the board, I mean, it really depends what the administration does, right? I mean, the tension here has been from the start, the board has been pushing to expand that program, right? To launch it in the beginning, to expand it, to not wind down these hotels. They are right now the most immediate best solution to not having folks living on the streets, right? And for all the folks who are concerned about homelessness, it's like the reverse, not only the solution right now, but if you close, I mean, if you close thousands of hotel rooms without a real plan, that's going to be a problem. Now, I will say that I think the administration has done, has had a commitment around trying to move folks from the hotels, not to the streets, and correctly so. Like, I think there is a general agreement that we want people moving from, shelter-in-place hotels into supportive housing or into apartments or whatever's suitable for their situation, and not back to the streets and not to shelters. But the board, if they're winding down and closing, if that's going to be the plan, and they're going to continue to push hard to be super conservative and close these down, then the board will push back. And yes, there'll be further hearings, but there's nothing scheduled. I don't think, Jimbo can correct me if there's something coming up, but there's previously been hearings on that, but I don't think there's anything coming up. And we just had this announcement this week, so we need to see how they're going to respond to it.
Yeah, I think we have a challenge with Supervisor Haney running for office. But the shelter-in-place hotels stopped taking new intakes back in March 2021, and I've met seniors that became homeless since March that really could have benefited from a shelter-in-place hotel, even if they weren't guaranteed a placement, because they're on fixed income and it takes time to find an apartment that's suitable for them. It's a real challenge. I think people who haven't experienced being on a fixed income and the not understanding how unaffordable the city can be in terms of searching for a new apartment. A lot of these seniors have been evicted from their apartments because of being priced out of their apartments. And so that's been really just disturbing, because I've met people that work their entire lives and just don't have the means to remain housed at 72. It's the reason why we created the social security net, the safety net, Social Security. It's just not keeping up with the cost of living.
And to try to bring that back home, I know Supervisor, you've generously given us another 15 minutes from when you said you'd like to be out of here. I'd like to think that you're so enwrapped with the conversation that you want to stay, because this really is 730 Stanyon writ citywide. We have needs that are so profound that we need interim uses, immediate uses, and long-range uses. And we need to walk and chew gum around housing. and dealing with people who have no housing, and dealing with people who are at risk of losing their housing, and dealing with people who rent housing and are at risk of losing their apartment. It is a complex in the city. It is a complex continuum. And I want to congratulate you and your office for bridging gaps on the community side that have historically existed between nonprofit developers, service providers, and tenant activists. And that's what makes a city like San Francisco work. A city in which most of the units that most people live in are cost controlled, either through rent control or being a BMR or being permanently affordable housing. Most of the housing that most of the people live in District 5 live in is cost controlled. So we have this incredible continuum that we have to deal with, and with many different moving parts. And that's 730 Stanton. How do we deal with an interim use that meets immediate needs, yet at the same time have the ability to profoundly affect the future immediate needs by providing permanent housing for a population, for three populations, the families, seniors, and young people, transition-aged youth that are part of this community and have been part of this community for the last 60 years. It is great that you're our supervisor. I think you're struggling mightily with these issues. And the 730 Stanton struggle should be our struggle here at the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council and in this neighborhood. It's going to be our place. We're going to live with it, and we're going to live with the people who live there. So it's really important to make friends with them before they come, and to make sure that they are understood and accepted into the community, and that they understand us and accept us. That's the granular struggle that we're engaged in around 730 Stanton. And I'm very happy that Supervisor Preston is dealing with all of the interconnections above us that have to work, and he's doing a grand job in doing so. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the kind comments. I appreciate it. And I agree that it really is, I think, an important, not just for the site, but for the entire neighborhood, and also just says a lot about how we're gonna handle these issues, and good and bad, right? I mean, I frankly find it an embarrassment that as a city, we're so dysfunctional that we just have a huge lot in the middle of the Haight-Ashbury sitting with a chain link fence around it. I'm proud that whatever folks thought of the safe sleeping site, it was a functional use. I mean, we are pleased with how it was used, but it's also just to see it activated was really important. And
a paid security guard. Let's not remember that they've had a paid security guard there from day one.
Yeah.
Talk about money.
I mean, I will say that that I continue to be really, and it's a testament to all the work and deeper discussions that the community has had about the permanent housing there. You know, our office is very proud of the really broad community support for 100% of 100% affordable housing in a neighborhood that hasn't seen a lot of proposals for 100% affordable housing. And it's and I don't, when I say we're proud of it, I don't know, you know, we're one piece of it. I mean, this predates, you know, this is community work, right? This is the difficult conversations, sitting down. And I will say, even when they expanded the, you know, what the design was going to be, had a lot of conversations with folks, both at the site on the day when folks were there and privately, of people who that may not have been their ideal. Like they were part of a community process that wanted it to be a little different or serve different population or have a different look. And I feel like folks have really like given their input, but also, and I was worried when, frankly, when MoCD just kind of changed everything without talking to anyone. You know, I remember telling MoCD, telling the developers that I'm worried about, like, that's not a good way to build trust with the community when folks are coming together around affordable housing. But even through that, folks didn't waver. And I'm sure someone can tell me I'm wrong with one person here or there, but overall, the sentiment of the community, as far as we hear it, is a strong support for 100% affordable housing as soon as possible on that site, to welcome neighbors, some different views on, you know, how many of the units should be for this population or that population, how are we going to get the word out to make sure seniors or families are, you know, like there are operational details, there are issues of who's going to be in the commercial spaces. There's lots to work out. But my hope is that we can maintain this unity, and the nonprofit developers have been part of that. I mean, they've been incredibly engaged. I don't know if folks, you know, a lot of you I know were out there, came to their meetings and were out there on site, and they've been extremely responsive to people, TNDC and CCDC. And so, you know, I just, that for us is really a goal, is to work out whatever issues need to be worked out, but to really maintain the unity that to be candid has been lacking a little on the interim use, but has remained there in terms of the permanent use.
Thank you. So I do think that we have exhausted the questions that came through. It is 8:52. And I think that it's been a long week. A lot of community meetings. And I appreciate all of you, and Supervisor Preston and the members of your team for, you know, being so responsive and trying to be so transparent in a time that's been extremely challenging for a variety of reasons. So thank you. I know we're still in a pandemic. We're still trying to do these meetings over Zoom. We're still grappling with income inequality and the issues of crime and safety, and also affordability in our community. And I want to thank everybody for being so engaged.
Thanks, Kristen, and yeah, and thank you, everyone. And I do want to just make sure folks, I previously introduced Jennifer Boland, Jembo, who's on. Just make sure, you know, we have two new folks on our team. So Jembo joined, and then also Melissa Hernandez, who some of you met because she does our public safety work specifically. Avery and Jen are still around. You will still run into them in the neighborhood, and they are still working on ballot measures and elections and things like that. So they are around, but our team in the office, you'll be dealing in the hate more regularly with Jembo. So definitely reach out, and we appreciate appreciate all your activism. And I guess what I would just say, you know, to Kristen, your last point, I mean, absolutely exceedingly difficult time, right? And we certainly, you know, I came into office 3 months before the pandemic hit. So it's been, you know, it really sort of defined my first couple years. But I also think there's been space to look at some of these issues in a much bolder way. And in part, and we talked about some of the funding that's available, is that I think historically in this city, when you propose ideas like, hey, how about offering people who are on the street a hotel room? How about, right? You're told none of those things are financially viable. When you're told, like, let's go acquire hotels for, you know, permanently supportive housing, it's like, well, where's the money going to come from? You talk about doing community land trusts, and it's like, we should quadruple the number of these that we do, or times 10. It's like, well, who's going to pay for that? And the reality is, between the ballot measures that we've passed, the state funding through Home Key and the federal reimbursement money, it's like the money cannot, like that excuse is off the table for homeless response, for, you know, like we can scale up. We really can scale up around solving some of these issues that have plagued people and who are living on the streets and plagued, you know, just been such a problem for so long because of the unaffordability of the city. So so it's been, yes, a stressful and difficult time, but also some opportunities there to like address really long-standing issues and concerns, and appreciate HANC's partnership as we've tried to think big and make some change.
Thank you so much. And as promised, I wanted to give space to people who wanted to make announcements. And I wanted to mention that tomorrow, it's my understanding that Britney Spears is having her day in court and her conservatorship is expected to be terminated. And there'll be a rally at SF General Hospital at noon tomorrow by people that want to see conservatorship reform. And people are welcome. There'll be speakers. Really intriguing group that I've just gotten to know recently, and they have some really powerful things to say. People that have been conserved through, you know, mental illness or mental health concerns or disability. Really powerful testimonies there. Anyone else have announcements? And as I mentioned on Sunday, there will be a D5 eviction-free lit drop at noon on Sunday. And if you're interested in participating that on an ongoing basis, if you can't participate this Sunday, I can connect you with Pat that's leading that effort for Neighbors United. And it looks like David has allowed us the freedom of unmuting. Zoom bombers, if you lasted this long, you are welcome to speak.
I think we put them all to sleep.
I think they've got to be teenage boys, don't they?
Wow.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
a phenomenon.
They were in force yesterday too. Yeah.
Where is the Sunday event?
The Sunday event, we did find the location. Let me look that up real quick here.
Should be Octavia and Fell.
Yeah, Fell and Octavia.
Can you, what's the exact
At
address?
noon,
It's going to be outdoors on Patricia's Green at Octavia and Fell.
Thank you. I'm saying what time? Sorry, what time?
Noon on Sunday.
No, okay, thank you. Octavian Fell, noon on Sunday.
great. I'm not hearing any other additional announcements.
I
So
I can do a real short one.
Please, Richard.
Yeah, Park Branch is changing their hours effective Saturday. I don't have all the hours in front of me, but it's Tuesday and Wednesday they'll be open till 8, and on Sunday and Monday they're going to be open. I think Sunday's 1 to 5, and I'm not sure about Monday, but I can forward that.
Great. And I'm guessing we will include that information in our upcoming newsletter in December.
Yes.
I'd like to say something about that, please.
Yes. Hi.
That sounds like Peter.
It does.
This is Peter Warfield from Library Users Association. Finally, getting some evening hours. The pre-COVID hours were till 9 o'clock Tuesday and Wednesday, and 7 days. We're getting the 7 days back, but system-wide, they are chopping evening hours, which their surveys have always shown are what people most request when they're asked, what would you like for additional hours for your branch or the library system. And the library has been very slow in recovering. There's a lot of problems with the library, partial services, desks that are not open at the main library, magazines and periodicals that are not up to date, current, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of problems with really getting back to full library service, which they themselves say are not going to happen until next year. It's really very poor to cut the evening hours when they're restoring them, especially for people working, people who are in school, anybody who's busy during the day, and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah,
And I do know that we're all sort of getting back to normal. Richard, were you also going to mention City Hall hours?
no, that I don't know, but I was going to give the specifics on Park Branch.
Please go ahead.
Monday, 12 to 6, Tuesday, 10 to 8, Wednesday, noon to 8, Thursday, 10 to 6, Friday, 1 to 6, Saturday, 10 to 6, and Sunday, 1 to 5. And those hours start this Saturday.
Thank you, Richard. And as I said, I know that we're all still trying to get back to normal. I was mentioning at the top of the hour, at the beginning of this meeting, that I know a number of people that are still struggling to find a booster appointment, and that is an ongoing concern. But hopefully people will be able to obtain their booster. We did have someone at the Booksmith who tested positive after a breakthrough case of COVID. She had been, her second shot last in February, and she tested positive in early November. Fortunately, she had not been on the floor, and we've all tested negative since, all of her work colleagues. But it is, boosters are important for those of us that have waning immunity from the initial vaccines. And I know that we all are trying to stay safe. And also crave each other's company in person too.
Any plans for meeting? Sorry, any
Oh, I
plans
just
for
had a
meeting?
question.
Any plans for meeting in person for HANC?
We have discussed it, and so far we've had a number of people express still ongoing concerns about, not feeling comfortable and not feeling safe. So one of the challenges that we have is, if we were to provide an in-person meeting, how to successfully also incorporate those people that would want to participate remotely. So we will announce in the newsletter when we are comfortable that we have a mechanism to be inclusive and return to in-person. Part of the reason why we were delaying also in person is the meeting space that we normally use at the Park Branch Library was also not available to us. So as Richard was mentioning, the availability of Park Branch hours is now getting back to somewhat normal, as Peter pointed out, not to full normal. And so we'll be evaluating spaces where we can meet in person. But stay tuned in the newsletter.
And then I had a COVID question.
Yes, Karen.
I've been seeing that numbers are going up, but I'm not clear about San Francisco. Does anybody know how our numbers are doing?
Yes, they're going up. So there is a website that if you Google San Francisco COVID data tracker, you can look at the case counts.
Okay.
Just as a, they report with a 5-day lag, and the last numbers I saw our cases climbing from a 7-day average of 58 to the last couple days that they were reporting were around 100 cases reported. So there was a pretty significant jump, but those numbers were not
Yeah.
validated. But there is a trend towards a spike in cases that are being reported, not just in San Francisco, but beyond San Francisco as well, as people return to indoor activities and gatherings.
Oh, boy. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
And just like to say that most pharmacies have rapid tests that run about 2 packs run about $25. So it's always good to have them around either at home or in the office, just to cover CYA.
Can you say something about what those 2 packs are for?
They are rapid tests that will provide you a result within 45 minutes. They're nasal tests. And
So
there are-
I did a little bit of research on them.
Yeah.
My sister, who's a nurse practitioner, had forwarded me one of the academic papers on them. They are testers that you would go to the hospital or to the sanctioned city COVID testing centers. They're not as reliable, but they are unlikely to give a false positive, which I think is one of the key factors. If you test positive with one of these tests that Bruce is referring to, the Buy Next Now test or the other ones that you can buy at the pharmacy, it's unlikely to give a false positive, but also not as sensitive and unlikely to detect cases with a lower viral load. So they're good. They're good measure if, like, say you can't get a test for like 48 hours, but you can buy that test at the pharmacy within an hour. It just gives you additional information. If you test positive with that pharmacy test, you're likely positive. If you test negative, that doesn't mean that you're for sure negative. It's still good to follow up with the official test.
So Kirsten, can I just add something favorable about evening hours at the main library?
Yes, of course, Peter.
Yeah, it's Peter Warfield again. The main library did go back to pre-COVID hours, fully open according to pre-COVID hours, a fairly short time ago. But in any case, that means that they're open until 8 o'clock at night on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and an hour later than any branches on Sunday night until 6 o'clock. So that's for folks who care about, late afternoon or evening hours availability in general, and certainly at the biggest and best stocked and so on library, the main library.
Thank you. And I know internet access is critical for people that the library provides as well.
Yes, and in my experience, the main library has, and really the branches that I've gone to have had very low attendance, relatively speaking, compared to previously. And so usually you can get as much as 2 hours a day, system-wide.
On the internet. Thank you, Peter.
On the computer, yes.
Thank you. I'm still impressed that we have 18 of us on the call. I wonder how many of us are Zoom bombers.
I'm not. This is Susan. I'm not a Zoom bomber. I'm just having a blast seeing a lot of faces that I haven't seen for a long time. I haven't gone to a HANC meeting in ages, even on Zoom. So it's just sort of really wonderful to get that warm